Hey there, it's Ross Rosenberg, the author of The Human Magnet Syndrome and the creator of the Codependency Cure Treatment Program and the 50 Shades of Pathological Narcissism series. Today I'm going to talk about SLDD or Codependency Anorexia. Although I've discussed it before in other videos, a lot has changed in my ideas. I want to talk about something that has interested me even when I wrote the very first version of the Human Magnet Syndrome in 2013 and especially in the 2018 version. To understand Self-Love Deficit Disorder, SLDD, aka codependency, you have to understand that personality traits are independent of the disorder. Because if we look at personality traits, it then gets very, very confusing on figuring out who indeed is the SLD, self-love deficient, my word for codependent, and who is not. Because, if you read all of the books that were written in the 80s and 90s, codependents or SLDs are portrayed as needy, insecure, passive, perpetually giving, not assuming, and that's simply not true. Just remember this fact: personality type is independent of either SLDD, codependency, or pathological narcissism. What is critical is to diagnose the problem. Although SLDD is not included in either of the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, DSM-5, or the ICD-11, I conceptualize it as it is. Therefore, I created a simplistic definition that is in my Human Magnet Syndrome books. SLDD is simply a person who, within a relationship, gives most, if not all, the love, L, the respect, R, and caring, C, the LRC to others, hopes it's reciprocated, wants it to be reciprocated, tries to get it reciprocated, but they can't. And within this condition, they still decide to stay in a relationship because the Human Magnet Syndrome predicts that they will be attracted to a narcissist. So if we understand that is the primary definition of SLDD, and that personality does not define SLDD. For example, I created 5 SLDD codependency personality types, which are on other videos, to explain how a myriad of traits and adaptations in narcissism and ways to defend yourself or ways to cope are created in one's personality. For example, we have the passive, the active, the oblivious, the cerebral, and the anorexic SLD or codependent. All of these type of SLDs are very different on the outside. So if we understand that personality is independent, you can have an angry SLD, a lying SLD, manipulative SLD, or you can have the salt of the earth that is so wonderfully moral and law-abiding. The same goes, by the way, and this goes beyond what I want to talk about, is mental health issues and other perhaps independent variables. Real quickly, you can have bipolar disorder and fall within an SLD category or narcissist. You can be depressed, anxious, ADD, etc. So I present you this information to understand the term SLDD anorexia. I learned this years ago when studying eating disorders, bulimia, anorexia, and sex addiction anorexia. And I believe that's a concept created by Patrick Carnes. What I started to think about as I learned about anorexia, it was mostly present in children or adolescents who lived in very controlling, rigid families that did not know how or want to be nurturing, affectionate, and emotionally connective to the child or children. Therefore, the child who felt like she or he had no control in the family, or perhaps no control over others to love them, respect them, or care for them, figured out that the way that they can control their world, or at least feel like they can control the world, is by controlling their body, their eating, their appetite, and their weight. Now, I know this might sound kind of odd because if you look at it from the perspective, well, why would you starve yourself if you are not being loved. But just trust me that this is an accepted paradigm, an accepted explanation within the mental health, psychological, and psychiatric communities. With that fact, scientific, research-based psychological fact, then I'd like to introduce the idea of the SLD who cannot control their human magnet syndrome compelled attraction to narcissists because of their relationship with narcissists or the history of their relationships with narcissists. They have experienced tremendous consequences that for some of the SLDs are much worse. So the SLDs, people who are self-love deficient, who are to become SLDD anorexics, their losses and trauma more often than not exceed the same type of trauma in other SLDs. So these SLDs, they eventually hit bottom. And it is the one narcissist, the one event by the narcissist, or the one breakup from the narcissist, whether they initiated it or the narcissist initiated it, they hit bottom. Much like other addicts, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, the only way that a person truly understands the depth of despair and loss and lack of control of the problem, the addiction, they have to be in tremendous pain. They have to have been almost buried by the consequences of the losses that come with their addiction. You guys probably know if you followed me, and if you don't, go to my selfloverecovery.com website, and I have full-length seminar videos on SLDD addiction. But it'll suffice to say that self-love deficit disorder is an addiction, and my treatment program addresses that part of the addiction. So because SLDD is an addiction, and all SLDs, whether you're an SLD anorexic or any type of SLD, they struggle with that. The addiction is to a relationship unless they feel horrible pathological loneliness. That is the withdrawal symptom of SLDD. And it is considered by many of my clients as much worse than any withdrawal symptom of a chemical drug. And that pathological loneliness taps into core shame that was created by the trauma they endured as children being raised by a narcissist. And that's explained in my codependency cure work. So because of the pathological loneliness and the pain of that withdrawal symptom, the SLD is going to bounce into a relationship with another narcissist, come back to that relationship with another narcissist, or be terribly and horribly in pain when in between such. For the person who becomes an SLDD anorexic, the consequences are so severe and the losses are so severe that they can't take it anymore. And they make this promise to themselves. That is, they are never going to be in another romantic, intimate, or sexual relationship. And because of that decision, they are able to avoid narcissists. They're not attracted to them, they stay away from them, and they look like they're safe and healthy. They are starving themselves from a perfectly normal, biologically developed through evolution, part of humanity. They have to turn it off. They have to turn off the romantic and sexual machinery, as I call it, so that they are not compelled to be attracted to the next narcissist. They know consciously that if they succumb to that human magnet syndrome compelled addictive desire, that it will be even worse than the last set of consequences they endured. So that decision, no more sex, romance, intimacy decision, on one hand, consciously seems like the right thing to do, and it seems like a no-brainer. Stop wanting to have sex, stop wanting to be intimate, stop wanting to be in a romantic relationship, and then they are not destroyed by their own addiction. And so it goes. These SLDs are not in any relationships, and they seem happy. But that's not the truth, because every single one of these SLDs, the ones that I've met, they have been numbed, disassociated from this, and seemingly broken. And what I came to understand, that SLDD anorexia is a form of affective disassociation. Affect is emotions as expressed, emotions that are seen through behavior and observation. So disassociating from the very human part of themselves takes the pain away. But the problem with disassociating is that you might feel less pain, but you don't feel much at all. You're kind of floating in your own world, numb in many respects, avoiding pain, and consciously believing you're safe and therefore happy. But a person who's an SLD anorexic who is using this form of affective disassociation, they don't know what happiness is. Invariably, when I am with such a person, and I remember the very first client I had, she was a psychotherapist, that I was able to understand her version of self-love deficit disorder, codependency. I was able to understand it through this explanation that I had just created. And I asked her, are you happy not being in a relationship with a man, and of course it could be any type of partner, for over 5 years? And she goes, oh yeah, naturally. Why wouldn't I? No pain, no loss. And I said to her, you're a 38-year-old woman and you have divorced yourself, took away, split yourself off from one of the most pleasurable, enjoyable aspects of being human. Intimacy is part of our human nature. We are built to be intimate. We have this baseline of a personality trait where we just will end up with someone because of our need for intimacy. As I talked to her about that, she started to cry. And it wasn't the type of crying that I see that what I would call non-disassociated affective response. This was a open expression of sadness. It's like it just erupted. It was as if I turned off that lever inside of her brain that disassociated herself, numbed herself, distracted herself from feeling, yearning, and wanting intimacy. And I reminded her in a therapeutic way of the tremendous loss that she was experiencing because of the decision. It was then, and this took place in a period of 2 to 3 months, perhaps even longer, we talked about all of the events that led up to her decision, which was probably 50% conscious and 50% unconscious, to turn off that machinery, that need, that desire. And then we started talking about what she thought was healthy and normal relationships with friends. And we started to understand, of course, I knew already, but we started to understand that there was a threshold that she would reach in any relationship where she would then back down from any form of intimacy. And as you guys know, and hopefully you do, intimacy is not about sex all the time. You can be intimate with your children, close, emotionally connected, vulnerable, a hug, a nice comment, a smile. There are so many forms of intimacy. This was one with this client, and of course many others after that. We understood that once they got to this threshold, there would be like a click, a lock, where all of a sudden the SLDD anorexia machinery would click on, and all of a sudden they would kind of go numb, and they wouldn't think about it, and therefore wouldn't feel it. So, like with this client, the very first person I discovered to have SLD anorexia, and all the subsequent clients, it began a very deep and profound grieving process about how much they lost during the time they were anorexic. But that wasn't the hardest part of the grief. The next phase was the grieving process of the harm, the abuse they endured because of their SLDD. But that wasn't even the hardest part. As you probably know, I have an 11-stage treatment program that goes through in a systematic way different methods, stages, incrementally in order to reach self-love abundance and solve self-love deficit disorder. I call that my codependency cure. The next, even more painful part of their grief or grieving was the realization that they never had intimacy, although they always desired it. And they always chose, because of their own broken picker, they always chose the person who was most likely to hurt them than to be intimate. And then, of course, the final, completely overwhelming and very controlled form of my treatment program or therapy is the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the terrible pain involved in their childhood when they were raised by pathological narcissists in a relationship where they never got to experience with their narcissistic parent and perhaps their codependent parent the true parent-child intimacy, the freedom, the relaxation, the knowledge that they are beautiful, loving, and there is an open expression of someone's connection to them. So what I'm saying, and how I will wrap up this YouTube video, is that for those SLDs who cannot manage the absolute pain, the consequences, the losses of their SLDD, which, by the way, can be anything from a marriage, a child who won't talk to them, multiple jobs, friends, and in some cases, the death of a child. They are so deeply buried by their consequences, and they know that they have no ability to stop falling in love with narcissists. They shut it down. And once it's shut down, they don't even know it anymore. And then it becomes so successful, they never think about it again. If you identify as an SLDD anorexic, please read my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, to start off with. And then I recommend, and there's a order of my educational seminars on my selfloverecovery.com website that will help you understand the different elements about this. It'll introduce you to the Codependency Cure, the treatment program, in an attempt to help you resolve as much as you can and to gain information that you can bring to a person that can help guide you through the process. So I hope this was helpful. And if this video upset you, made you sad, made you anxious, and you felt this desire to click out of it, maybe there's something to it to think about. Be well. Please subscribe. Please check out my Self-Love Recovery Institute's website, selfloverecovery.com, and give me some comments. I love your comments. Okay, guys, bye-bye.